Now, why? Here's a kind of a dumb question, but it's one I always go back to, which is as you go through chapter to chapter of the book, and you present evidence, one piece of evidence after another, of ways in which our cues in our environment are affecting us, the way we behave. And each time I say to myself as I read them, wow, I didn't know that, right? Now, why don't I know that? So why isn't it obvious to us that we would be profoundly affected by cues in our environment? Why wouldn't we say, oh, that person's wearing red? Of course, that's why, I have the hots for her. Why do these things, why do they always come as a surprise?
I think the feedback we get is so murky and so noisy that we get feedback that just doesn't correspond to the nature of the effect. So when you like someone, one thing we do is we fabricate reasons all the time. So there's a classic study where people looked at a row of pantyhose, and this was done I think in the 60s, and they were asked, which one of these pantyhose do you like the most? And we have a strange preference to prefer sometimes the first thing we look at, sometimes the last thing. But when you ask people, they almost always chose the pair on the right. When you ask them, they say, I like the one on the right because it's a little more sheer, it seems like it's a little stretchier, it's exactly what I'm looking for in a pair of pantyhose. But they were all the same pair. There was no difference. But that sheer is what I'm looking for in pantyhose.
No, I was questioning whether you were in fact looking for sheer in pantyhose, but go on.
Yeah. So these are all the same pair. So people are fabricating after the fact these explanations for why they like that pair. So we are very good at doing that after the fact. And often the explanations or the real forces driving our feelings and our thoughts, the ones that I talk about in the book, are not as obvious, and therefore over the top, we layer over that our own explanations that seem more compelling to us. Mm-hmm. And because the feedback is so noisy, we can do that. And we never ever get correction from the environment.
But so here's an example where I had this question, which is this really fascinating part where you're talking about how the language that's used to describe events affects our memory. So this was the one about the with cars.
The car, yeah.
So wait, tell us that for a minute, and then I'll come back to my question.
Yeah, this is a classic effect in legal testimony, in the psychology of legal testimony and eyewitness memory. So people watch a video and they watch a car colliding with another car, or I think there are a number of versions. In one version, the car is colliding with another car. And they're asked all sorts of questions about it after the fact, and that collision is described with different terms. And some of the terms make it sound like it was faster than other terms. So sometimes they're asked, when the car collided with the other car, how fast was it going? At other times they're asked, when the car smashed the other car, how fast was it going? And there are a whole lot of different words. I think there are 5 or 6 variations. Contact was the lightest, yeah, the most gentle. It's like the two cars just had a peck on the cheek. And people, when they remember that event, based on the word used, will remember that the cars were going at different speeds. So their estimates of how fast the cars were going are driven by these different words.
And also whether there was glass broken.
And whether there was glass broken,
yeah,
which is critical for eyewitness testimony. Because obviously when people are remembering the event, if you are trying to sway them as an advocate, you may want them to remember that, or you may want them not to remember that, and you can sway their memory, you can twist their memory.
So, but this is where I had the question. So why don't we, when people direct us to remember an event, when they say how fast were the cars going when the cars collided or smashed into each other, why don't we say, wait a minute, don't prejudice my response, use a neutral word? I mean, why isn't that the first thing that comes to mind? I mean, it seems to me really obvious that we know the word smashed into is loaded, right?
Right.
So why don't we call attention, and why isn't it obvious to us that the use of that kind of loaded language is something that we ought to be protected from?
It's a big question in psychology, whether you react against what's being shown to you or whether you assimilate it with your memory. Mm-hmm. And I think often the memory is sufficiently malleable or unclear to you that you are happy to take on that baggage, that new piece of information, and it doesn't sound so egregiously different from what you saw that you say, hang on, that's not right, I'm being swayed here, I'm being manipulated. If you do feel that, then you will get a rebound effect. And so if you do, in the very rare case where you feel that someone is manipulating you, and a courtroom is actually a good place where this does happen sometimes, people are more aware of that, and if you're railing against an argument and you're facing cross-examination, you obviously will get angry if you feel that's happening. But very often, I think there's enough murkiness that instead of railing against it, you take it on board and it just becomes a part of that memory.